So a copy of the presentation will be in the CD that's sent to you. If there's anyone that has any questions, I'd be glad to answer them at this time. Yes, sir.
The numbers that you were showing just on the previous screen, those are annual numbers, right?
Yes, sir. Good point. Good point. It is the value of the carbon emissions on an annual basis. So it is not a cumulative value. It is an annual value of what the carbon emissions represent. Absolutely. And that's why I was saying somewhere between $60 to $120 billion per year will be added in cost to electricity. So, to energy. So electricity goes up, the cost of gasoline goes up, the cost of natural gas will go up. I mean, it's a transparent cost. Yes, sir.
You referred a couple of times to N2O as a greenhouse gas and also as a combustion product. Now, I don't know about gas engines, but on a gas turbine, the nitrous oxides that you get are NO and NO2, but not really N2O. Could you comment a bit on?
No, I didn't mean it in combustion. I meant it as a greenhouse gas. I just meant as its role. If we look at some of the catalytic reactions that take place in a catalyst, and we look at some of the things that are controlled for combustion, I just meant it was insignificant. I mean, I should have clarified that with NOx and not nitrous oxide, but I meant our nitrous oxide emissions are fairly negligible with regard to greenhouse gases. Yeah.
Just a comment on that. For measurements that have been done, it's very minute, but there are reactions that can take place. For example, across a NSCR catalyst on a rich burn engine, you could actually make N2O. So there will probably be a bit more attention to that going forward than there has been historically.
And Jim has an update at one that he does every year, so he'll get into a lot of detail. We just wanted to talk about the financial aspect of what carbon is representing. Yes, sir.
Brian, so question, maybe it's on a lot of our minds, is so what does this mean for us? What's the real takeaway message for us as
Well, I mean, being involved in the industry for many years and having a lot of respect for what we have done, and I mean, it's still been a reactive path to what happened in the Clean Air Act. Would a lot of these reductions happen without the legislation? There's a role of both. Now it seems like the legislation is really not rewarding what we have responded to. And so when you look at that, you say, well, how do I get through the future? I mean, if this is going to be an added cost, I mean, an 83% reduction in greenhouse gases, I start looking at the laws of combustion and thermodynamics, and we won't get there with the same infrastructure we have today. It's not going to happen. But that doesn't mean we need to necessarily change the infrastructure. To me, the message is very clear that there's an incentive to exceed what is being mandated in the early stages. And based on the work you've done, at Ingenuity, some of the other people in the room, we know that efficiency gains can be achieved from an operational standpoint. So the cleanest, MCF of fuel is the MCF we don't use, or the gallon we don't use, so there's incentive on the efficiency side to do the things that a lot of people are talking about at this conference, because ultimately the more efficient the equipment is, the less fuel it consumes, the less greenhouse gases it emits. But there's physically a financial mechanism that finally allows you to recoup that efficiency. If you drive below a 3% reduction, or you increase your efficiency by 8%, something to this effect, and you can do it in a multitudes of ways with different technologies, whether it's turbine, engine, or process. If you achieve those efficiency gains and document them, you're really creating a bankable credit. If we look at the preemptive international legislation and we look at the preemptive state legislation with regard to greenhouse gases. So I think the incentive is that in the early stages, we need to drive past the baseline that's being set in self-defense, because if we don't bank those credits, how do you get to an 83% reduction in 2005? And to your point of the discussion we had earlier about FERC, you can't retire horsepower, you've got to replace it with something on the transmission side.
If you're going to keep your certificate.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, let me ask you a follow-on. Really, it's for the pipeline folks in the room. Do you all, owners and operators of the pipes, believe that this kind of monetization of carbon can and will play into justification for efficiency-based projects? We know the difficulty has been, in the 20-plus years I've been in this business, there's been very little discretionary capital spent on efficiency. Not that there has been some, but it's fairly minute, because gas is cheap. And you got to save a whole lot of fuel or improve efficiency a long way to pay for anything of significance in terms of a project. So could this change that equation? Do you think, and is your management already talking about this entering into the financial justification process for efficiency projects?
So I think that question is addressed to people in the, yeah, absolutely. If there's someone who wants to comment on it, please do. I mean, I say efficiency, it could be more
I'm
than
not just
efficiency.
talking fuel efficiency, but compressor efficiency as well, which is actually, should be a bigger deal with transport numbers of 100 to 300. Flow side efficiency should be 100 to 300 times more valuable. But again, we don't see a lot of money being spent there.
I've not heard.
Yeah, Bill,
I've not heard any direct discussion about the greenhouse gas, the monetization of carbon as a driver, but I know that our company is looking at it at high levels. Just some general comments from executives and the CEO announcements and things. The company is clearly looking at this, and obviously, just from a business standpoint, economic justification is economic justification. Even excluding this, just when gas prices were dramatically higher, absolutely. I mean, efficiencies were pushing, projects to the top of the list. If you can show payback in a year, you're going to get funding to do those kind of projects. And again, when gas prices were higher and the economy was stronger, even now, currently it's a year or less, but we had guidance. If you could do it in 2 years, you can get funding for it. So I think it would be inevitable that if you can show this kind of monetization and the related benefit to the company for efficiencies, I think that's unavoidable.
you think, so you think,
Yeah,
you don't think it's going to be viewed though as a paper, the thing about compressor side efficiency for years has been, how do you put that money in your pocket? Right? A station superintendent who improves efficiency can't put that money in his pocket. It's a system benefit.
Right, the company can show that they put that money in their pocket.
Yeah.
Superintendent may not,
Right.
but at a company level, and that's where those kind of issues are driven from, is from that macroscopic perspective. And this seems to be, and I've got to say this just because I'll pop my head if I don't, I think this is a ridiculous tax on the entire world. But that being aside, the reality, if this passes, and it has not passed in the Senate, so this is not a given at this point. And for those people that support that, you can have your say, but I don't believe in this, and I think that this is a huge boondoggle on our country. So if contact your senators and tell them do not vote for this, oppose this with every ounce of energy that you have. I know that's not what you want to hear, Chet, because
No,
your
I'm
business is
not,
tied
I'm
to
not
this.
pro for that, but I guess I've probably come to the point, I think like Brian,
Do not resign yourself.
it doesn't
to this.
matter whether I agree with it or not.
No, and I agree. I mean, we've got to look at the potential reality of this.
Right.
But it is not a reality. And your last slide kind of gave the future is certain. Carbon is currency.
Well, let me address that. Carbon is currency. Carbon has been currency since the UNFCCC was established and since the Kyoto Protocol went through. The fact that there is the European Union's emissions trading scheme, the fact that the clean development mechanism in it has been funding hydro programs in China, there is a global market for carbon. We are in a globalized economy. Despite my personal opinion, which may not differ from yours, it is in our best interest to understand this and the mechanism. I do not believe like what your desire is will be the outcase, despite whether it's a boondoggle or not, because there's too much preemptive activity at an international level that has served to pull the United States into this. When we go to Copenhagen in this December, it's 2 months away, our president will be there, and the topic will be a post-2012 Kyoto Agreement. Kyoto expires in 2012. And China is on board. China is outpacing the United States in clean coal and wind and a lot of key areas. So there's a financial incentive for a lot of countries to push the post-Kyoto legislation through. If we don't have national legislation, I ask you, do you want the United Nations telling you how you're going to reduce your greenhouse gases? Because that's a possibility. And if that's not the case, do you want 50 different programs?
Not the majority of people in this room, that's not a possibility, because our country is still not ruled by the UN. Now, international companies are going to have to deal with their international aspects of it, but not for the U.S. The UN does not dictate, environmental law or any other law currently to the United States. And that's what we're talking about, is legislation in the U.S. So again, we don't have to resign ourselves to accept that this is going to happen in the U.S. Be prepared, absolutely, be prepared, but we don't have to give up yet.
The problem with that is that the EPA is also moving forward with environmental regulation. And at the rate they're going, if Congress doesn't act and do this, which I'm a meteorologist, don't get me into the whole science of climate change, because I could, fill weeks. But the EPA is going to act either way. I think with the new proposed emission standards for automotive vehicles, once that's finalized in March, it's my understanding that once carbon is regulated by EPA, that kicks off the entire Clean Air Act applicability to carbon.
It already started.
They won this.
I mean, it's already here, and in my mind, being the environmental person, the permitting person, it's going to be more difficult to have a command and control. Now we have to figure out, how do you do best available control technology for CO2 when you're trying to permit something, or every time you have to make a change at a facility, you've got a threshold trigger, and everything you do is significant. So, I mean, it's one or the other that's going to get us, and which one's the worst one?
Well, one other thing I think it's been interesting, and Bill, I don't think that probably many people have disagreed with your position, but here's the thing. The other thing I've seen that's of interest, it's not just a political, it's not just being driven by politicians. It really, honestly, in the U.S. is being driven by public outcry. Now, you might say it's primarily from misinformation and uneducation, but the other piece of this is that corporations, multinationals, are a part of the equation that's driving it there. Because for an ExxonMobil or a Shell to do business in all of the world, in many countries where the Kyoto Protocol is in play, they already, as a good citizen move, minimally as a good citizen move, have embraced this coming reality and are beginning to report it like financial results in their annual report. And so that to me is what is troubling, is it appears that you can't stop it. You can stop some pieces of it, but there's a lot of inertia, and it makes it difficult for us because we have to be prepared, not that we agree, and question, what do we do? What do we do to prepare, position?
Yeah, and I honestly didn't mean to sidetrack us too dramatically.
Well,
but I had to say that, or I would not.
Sure.
But again, to your question,
You're like the Apostle
yes,
Paul, you're compelled.